The mystery begins with the missing people. It all started on a cold February morning in 2019, when a promising college sophomore, Samantha Pierce, disappeared without a trace. Samantha was known for her love of nature and often spent her weekends hiking the peaceful trails of Shadywood Forest in northern Oregon. That Saturday, she texted her roommate Kayla, letting her know she'd be back by lunch. She never came back. At first, no one sounded the alarm. Samantha was a responsible young woman with no history of running away or showing any signs of distress. Her family, devastated by her sudden vanishing, described her as cheerful and ambitious. She had just gotten an internship at an environmental research firm, her father tearfully told reporters. There was no way she'd just walk away from her life. The search began immediately after Kayla reported her missing on Sunday morning. Police scoured the nearby trails and questioned hikers who frequented the area, but no one recalled seeing Samantha that day. Her car, however, was found parked near the entrance of Shadywood Forest, unlocked. Inside were her hiking boots and a half-finished water bottle. Strangely, her backpack, phone, and keys were gone. What made the situation even stranger was a witness who came forward, a fisherman who had been casting his line in the creek near the forest's edge. He mentioned seeing a young brunette, presumably Samantha, speaking to a man dressed in black robes near the old abandoned St. Mark's Chapel. He described the man as calm but peculiar, holding a Bible and gesturing as if giving her advice. When shown a photo of Samantha, the fisherman nodded. That could very well be her. This lead quickly drew the focus of the investigation to the eerie, overgrown ruins of St. Mark's, an old Catholic church that had been decommissioned decades ago after a scandal involving its priests. Urban legends swirled about the site being haunted, but no concrete evidence of wrongdoing had ever surfaced, until now. Volunteers and officers combed every corner of the dilapidated building and its surroundings but found no signs of Samantha, or the mysterious man. Just as the town was beginning to settle into uneasy silence, another name joined the list of the missing. Vanessa Harper, a newlywed florist, vanished 3 weeks later during an early evening stroll. She'd taken the same path countless times before, including as part of her daily exercise routine. Her husband Josh called her phone repeatedly after she missed dinner, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic consumed him when he found her dog, Charlie, tied to a tree at the trail's head. Vanessa nowhere in sight. The close proximity of the two disappearances sent shockwaves through the local community. Town hall meetings turned into heated arguments, with citizens demanding that the Shadywood Forest trails be temporarily closed until the mystery was resolved. "You don't understand," one elderly woman told the town council, visibly shaking. "People are disappearing into thin air. My granddaughter could be next." Despite intensified efforts by the authorities, including the deployment of K-9 units and even drones scouring the dense forest canopy, there were no immediate breakthroughs. Samantha and Vanessa's names became headlines on local news, but faded into the background of a town that feared acknowledging what seemed increasingly unexplainable. But the mystery deepened further. In early March, just as winter melted into spring, a third woman disappeared. Heather Graham, a freelance photographer, had ventured into Shadywood Forest for sunrise shots. Her camera was discovered near a weathered bench along the East Loop Trail. Her wallet was still zipped inside her camera bag, her truck keys dangling from a chest strap. Yet Heather herself was nowhere to be found. What police found particularly chilling was the single Polaroid she left behind, still in her camera's instant slide compartment. Taken just moments before her camera was abandoned, the photo showed sunlight breaking through the treetops, and a figure in the distance, blurred but distinctly human, watching her. By now, rumors of a Shadywood stalker gripped the close-knit community. Families forbade their children from wandering too far from home, and shop owners near the entrance to the forest reported a sharp decline in visitors. Some residents claimed to have seen shadowy silhouettes lurking near their properties or hearing faint whispers while walking in dense parts of the woods. Fear escalated until another key detail resurfaced. All three missing women were reportedly seen at or near St. Mark's Chapel before they disappeared. As the news spread nationally, a retired investigator from Portland, Charles Chuck Redman, came out of retirement to assist with what he described as the most bizarre pattern of disappearances he'd encountered in 30 years. "This doesn't feel like someone just getting lost in the woods," he told a local journalist. "This feels orchestrated, calculated." The chapel quickly became a focal point, but whatever secrets its cracked walls and ivy-covered altar held, it wasn't yielding them anytime soon. Forensic teams scoured the weathered pews, the bell tower, and the cobblestone basement, uncovering little more than graffiti and relics of teens daring each other on drunken dares. Still, officers stationed in the area began reporting strange occurrences. A missing flashlight here, footprints around parked vehicles at the trailhead in the mornings, and in one unsettling case, a small wooden cross left near their squad car windshield. By April, nerves were fraying. All caravans led back to the same questions. Who was the black-clad figure? Was the chapel associated with the disappearances or merely a coincidence? Could he, or they, strike again? Before the town could regain its footing, another name tragically made the case even more urgent. Megan Caldwell, a schoolteacher, was taking her students on a regional parks outing when she stepped aside to make a brief phone call. She never returned. Megan became the fourth woman to vanish near Shadywood that year. 4 women, all missing, all last seen either near or en route to the chapel, and nothing to explain why. What seemed like the tranquil charm of Shadywood Forest had crumbled to reveal a menacing enigma, and as the community braced itself for answers they weren't even sure they wanted, what became chillingly clear was this: something, or someone within those shadows, was preying on them. The first shocking discoveries. The serene Shadywood Forest finally gave up one of its ghosts on a cool morning in March 2019. Hikers discovered the body of Denise Carter, a 34-year-old elementary school lying face down in a shallow creek bed. What initially appeared to be a tragic accident, a slip and fall on the slick rocks, quickly unraveled into something far more sinister. From afar, Denise's body seemed oddly at peace, her long auburn hair fanned out in the running water. But as authorities examined the scene, they realized the truth. Denise hadn't fallen. She had been murdered. Her wrists bore deep indentations from rope, her ankles, they too had been bound. A faint rust-red streak marked her neck, hinting at strangulation. Perhaps most haunting, a faded rosary had been placed on her chest. This wasn't simply a murder, it was a staged murder. The discovery sent shockwaves through the local community. Denise was a kind-hearted soul, known for her love of teaching and her dedication to after-school programs for underprivileged children. She didn't have an enemy in the world, her sister Amanda said tearfully to reporters. Whoever did this has to be a monster. The crime scene itself left investigators baffled. The creek bed was partially exposed, visible to passers-by but shadowed by the towering trees nearby. Why would a killer leave Denise, and why the rosary? Was it a desperate attempt to send a message, a calling card meant to instill fear? Adding to the mystery, police discovered no immediate clues about how Denise had been transported to the location. There was no scuffle in the surrounding dirt or vegetation, no signs of a dragged body, and no tire marks leading to the area. It was as though she had simply been dropped there, a chilling thought. What's truly disturbing, said Detective Sarah Townsend during an interview with the local paper, is the way everything feels rehearsed. The lack of evidence isn't accidental, it's methodical. This isn't the doing of a reckless criminal. This is the work of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Friends and family of Denise began organizing vigils and search parties, convinced her death was connected to the recent disappearances in Shadywood. Samantha Pierce's face began appearing again on local news stations, often placed side by side with Vanessa Harper's. The three formed a troubling pattern: young women going alone into Shadywood Forest and never emerging alive. Fear that a serial perpetrator might be at large spread like wildfire. The next clue, however, did not come from forensics. It came from a maintenance worker cleaning up an old hunting cabin near the forest. He stumbled upon a weathered backpack lodged beneath a pile of dry leaves. Inside, authorities found a pair of hiking boots, a water bottle, and a crumpled notebook filled with drawings of flowers, trees, and poems. Items that were later confirmed to belong to Samantha Pierce. The chilling detail? The cabin was several miles from her last known location. Forest rarely visited due to its dense vegetation and long abandoned trails. Forensics teams scoured the cabin for DNA, fingerprints, or any trace of a suspect but found nothing definitive. It was almost too clean, a haunting echo of the creek bed where Denise had been found. Then came the break everyone was dreading. 2 weeks after Denise's body was discovered, a group of teenagers sneaking into St. Mark's Chapel stumbled upon something horrifying: bloodstains leading to a small trap door beneath the altar. When authorities were called in, they uncovered a rudimentary pit lined with dirt and twigs containing what appeared to be scraps of fabric and traces of human hair. While no bodies were found, the bloodstains and materials sent a message loud and clear. St. Mark's was shaping up to be ground zero for something far more sinister than ghost stories. The unsettling discovery of the pit painted the stark image of a predator who was not just killing but meticulously planning, hunting, and leaving breadcrumbs as part of a morbid game. Conspiracy theories erupted online, some believing the killer was a cult leader operating out of St. Mark's, while others speculated the disappearances were the work of someone imitating religious figures to lure victims into a false sense of security. By this point, Detective Townsend became the public face of the investigation. Relentless in her pursuit of answers, Townsend held a press conference the day after the pit was found. "We are following every lead," she said firmly, though her strained demeanor betrayed the growing pressure she and her team faced. "But we have to stress to the public, do not go into Shadywood Forest alone. Stay in groups, remain alert, and please, report any suspicious activity immediately." One young woman's bravery also gave investigators a critical insight. Charlotte Lang, a 27-year-old trail runner, came forward recounting an unsettling encounter she'd had shortly before Denise's body was discovered. While jogging through the East Loop Trail, she met a man dressed as a priest, carrying a large cross and a worn Bible. He introduced himself as Father John and asked if she would join him for prayer at St. Mark's Chapel. Charlotte declined, but something about his demeanor stuck with her. His voice was gentle, yet there was a chilling vacancy in his eyes. "It was like he was wearing a mask," she told police. "I ran as fast as I could after that." The information, while brief, validated the suspicions that had been building since the fisherman's observation of Samantha speaking to a similar figure. Authorities began piecing together patterns from the sightings that painted an evident link between the so-called Father John, St. Mark's Chapel, and the growing list of victims. As the puzzle began to take shape, one truth was undeniable. The idyllic Shadywood Forest was no longer a place of escape. It had become a hunting ground for a predator lurking among the shadows of its trees. Now, with a body in the creek, bloody remnants in the chapel, and terrified witnesses coming forward, the question was no longer if the killer would strike again, but when, and who might be next. A mysterious priest appears. As fear tightened its grip on the community of Shadywood, rumors began to circulate about a strange man seen wandering near the forest trails. Some called him the black-robed figure. Others simply referred to him as Father John. But while the town tried to piece together who or what this figure was, new sightings painted a hauntingly consistent portrait. It was a sunny afternoon in mid-March when Evelyn Marshall, a 48-year-old mother of three, decided to walk her Labrador Toby along the wooded edges of Shadywood. She had lived in the area her whole life, and knew the trails as well as she knew the streets of her neighborhood. But on this day, even Toby seemed unsettled. His tail stayed low and he frequently stopped, ears perked, to listen to something she couldn't hear. "I thought it was just a deer rustling somewhere," Evelyn later told police, "but now I'm not so sure." Near the end of her trail loop, Evelyn saw him. A man standing perfectly still beneath the canopy of trees, dressed in long black robes that swayed slightly in a breeze she couldn't feel. He was holding a Bible in one hand, a large wooden cross in the other, and staring directly at her. Although she couldn't make out many details of his face, she felt an unsettling combination of calmness and terror. "He didn't say anything at first," Evelyn recounted at a community meeting weeks later. "He just tilted his head, smiled, and raised the cross toward me like he was offering some kind of blessing. Then he asked if I would join him in finding the light. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean, but it gave me goosebumps." Evelyn politely declined, tugged Toby's leash to hurry him along, and rushed back to her car. But she couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched long after she left. When she told her husband what had happened, he dismissed it as a harmless encounter. Still, something gnawed at her, and the next day, she called the local sheriff's office to report the incident. Evelyn wasn't the only one who had seen him. In fact, as investigators started connecting dots, they realized similar descriptions of a priestly figure had been given by other witnesses. Jennifer Collins, a 19-year-old college student, told friends she had seen a calm-looking man in religious clothing offering prayers by the old St. Mark's Chapel just days before Vanessa Harper disappeared. On a separate occasion, a pair of joggers heard a man chanting softly near the East Loop Trail. When they tried to approach to see what he was doing, he melted into the forest like smoke, leaving only the faint scent of incense behind. Despite the whispers and irregular accounts, there was one description investigators couldn't ignore: the fisherman who had seen Samantha Pierce talking to a similar figure before her disappearance. "That young girl was talking to him," the man said during questioning. "He seemed, I don't know, calm, but not comforting. I've been fishing these waters for years, and he didn't feel like someone who belonged here. Something wasn't right about him." By the end of March, descriptions of the man grew more chilling with each new testimony. A teenage boy riding his bike near the outskirts of the forest claimed the priest had stepped onto the path in front of him and raised both hands as if to bless him. "He looked almost normal," the boy said, "but his eyes didn't have anything in them." Another witness, an elderly woman walking her dog, claimed she had seen him mumbling scripture by the chapel ruins at dusk. "The meek shall inherit the earth," he kept saying, she recounted. "At first I thought he was a real preacher, but then he turned around, and his smile, there was something about that smile I didn't trust." The puzzle pieces investigators were collecting seemed scattered and surreal. Many in the community dismissed the accounts as overblown or exaggerated by fear. After all, urban legends often grew legs when panic spread, but not Detective Sarah Townsend. To her, it was looking more like a pattern. Calling a special meeting at the police station, Townsend addressed her team. "If this man exists, he knows the forest better than any of us," she said firmly, gesturing to a marked-up map of shady woods spread across the table. "If he's using the chapel ruins as a base or place to lure people, we need to lock down this area immediately. But make no mistake, we're not dealing with someone harmless. He's not just preaching." The team acted swiftly. Patrol officers were stationed closer to trailheads, and investigators began conducting daily sweeps of the St. Mark's Chapel grounds. But finding tangible evidence of the priest's connection to the disappearances proved maddeningly elusive. Although officers reported signs of recent activity, footprints in damp soil, extinguished candle stubs, and an abandoned prayer book written in Latin, there was nothing definitive linking it to the mysterious figure or the missing women. What made the priest even more alarming was his ability to vanish. A week after the patrols began, 2 hikers reported seeing a man dressed in robes kneeling in silent prayer near the edge of a rocky bluff. When patrolmen arrived less than 10 minutes later, they found no one there, only a faint indentation in the grass where someone may have been kneeling. "It's almost like he knows where the patrols are going to be," Townsend muttered to one of her deputies. "He's either extremely clever, or he's living out here all the time." Local news outlets caught wind of the growing hysteria, and began running headlines like, "The Priest of Shadywood, Savior or Stalker," and "Who is Father John?" While some members of the public believed the accounts were exaggerated, Townsend was increasingly convinced this man, if he even was a man, was hiding in plain sight. The climax of the month came when another witness, Julia Rogers, a camping enthusiast, came forward with an unsettling story. Camping in Shadywood with her fiancé, Julia woke up late one night to find their tent unzipped. Setting out with a flashlight, she spotted someone standing still about 50 feet away, watching them. He didn't run. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there holding what looked like a staff or maybe a cross. When she called out, the figure calmly turned and disappeared into the woods. By April, the so-called Priest of Shadywood had become synonymous with silent terror. Townsend and her team began circulating sketches based on eyewitness descriptions, angular facial features, hollow eyes, and an omnipresent cross or rosary draped around his neck. Though no official suspect had yet been named, everyone knew. Whoever this man was, his presence spoke of something far darker than the whispers of faith he offered. The flash of hope that came with each reported sighting was quickly followed by frustration as officers struggled to catch up to him. And so, the rumors began to spiral. Some speculated he was a former priest gone rogue, a disgraced man seeking to cleanse the community through unthinkable acts of violence. Others whispered about cult ties, claiming he wasn't alone in the woods, and that a congregation was hiding deeper within Shadywood's dense wilderness. The unanswered questions mounted: was this priest truly behind the disappearances, or was he just a ghostly detail in an increasingly dark story? As Townsend pinned the latest sighting to the growing map of his movements, she felt the weight of the unthinkable. If they didn't catch him soon, another person, another woman, was sure to vanish. Faint clues about the imposter. By late April 2019, the town of Shadywood was caught in a cloud of uncertainty, like a lingering storm that refused to pass. Stories of the so-called Priest of Shadywood were gaining traction, but concrete evidence remained frustratingly elusive. The scattered sightings, eerie encounters, and mysterious disappearances had painted an unsettling portrait, but no one could put a name, a motive, or even a clear face to the figure haunting the forest. All the town had were whispers and faint clues, and they weren't enough. One of the first voices to come forward was Lucy Miller, a backpacker who nearly became another victim. Lucy was passing through Shadywood as part of a solo cross-country hike. Excited by the pristine trails, she decided to explore Shadywood's less-trodden paths despite the growing rumors. But her adventure took a dark turn when she found herself being followed. Lucy recounted her story to Detective Sarah Townsend in vivid detail. She described how, as twilight fell, the sound of snapping twigs alerted her to a presence behind her. Turning, she saw a man dressed in stark black robes. He appeared calm as he approached, extending a hand in greeting, clutching a wooden cross. He had this strange feeling about him, Lucy said, her voice trembling, like he looked friendly, but something wasn't right. The man introduced himself as Father John, his voice calm and eerily sweet. He asked if Lucy needed guidance or someone to walk her back to the trailhead in the name of safety. But something in his aura, his slightly too long stare, the tension in his body, set off alarm bells in Lucy's mind. She politely declined and quickened her pace, but the man persisted, his footsteps audible behind her. He didn't yell or run, he just kept walking, slowly like he knew I wouldn't get far, Lucy said. She eventually ran, ditching the path to hide behind a large boulder until the unsettling figure left. Lucy escaped unscathed but shaken, providing investigators one of the first close encounters that confirmed their suspicions. This so-called priest was no benign presence. He was hunting. Unfortunately, Lucy couldn't provide much to narrow down his identity. He was tall, thin, she explained, probably at least 6 feet. He seemed older, his hair was graying, but I couldn't have guessed his exact age. Every vague detail she offered matched descriptions from other witnesses, a testimonial that built onto an already growing profile, but they were still dealing with shadows, half-understood glimpses of a predator. The following weeks offered little more than second-hand whispers and fleeting sightings. A hiker reported hearing soft chanting near St. Mark's Chapel late one evening but saw no one when they ventured closer. Another claimed to have smelled burning incense deep in the woods, mixed with the faint metallic tang of blood. There was no tangible proof. The priest seemed as much a myth as he was reality. Townsend's team began focusing on the scattered physical clues left behind: extinguished candle remnants, faint boot prints in the damp earth near the chapel, and several small weathered wooden crosses left lying in seemingly random places around the trails. Each clue was like a breadcrumb leading absolutely nowhere. The wooden crosses were the most puzzling. Were they meant as some kind of symbolic signature, a perverse taunt, or a marker for something darker? It wasn't just the forest the priest haunted. In early May, residents close to Shadywood began reporting unusual occurrences near their homes. Edna Grayson, a widow who lived on the forest's edge, called the sheriff's department after she found her front door open one morning and footprints in the soft dirt leading up to her kitchen window. It was like someone had been standing there watching, she told deputies with tears in her eyes. Inside her home, nothing had been stolen, but she did find a strange item left behind on her mantel. A single wooden rosary, its beads old and scuffed. It wasn't the only report of its kind. Michael Blake, the owner of a small general store near the trailhead, told investigators he had seen a man dressed as a priest, standing outside his shop late at night. The next morning, he discovered a Bible on his front stoop. "I nearly think the guy's just lost or trying to make a statement," Blake said when interviewed. "But if that's the case, why not show his face in broad daylight? Why creep around people's homes?" Despite the unnerving pattern of events, Townsend's team struggled to pin the priest, or whoever was behind this growing sense of dread, down to any tangible identity. A breakthrough of sorts came when Townsend decided to expand her investigation beyond the forest. She sent officers to question nearby churches and shelters, hoping to uncover details about anyone matching the mysterious figure's description. Several clergymen were interviewed, but not one claimed to have given sanctuary to someone fitting the priest's profile. One priest from a neighboring town shared an ominous story. "We had someone come through about 6 months ago," Father Matthew Clark said, looking pensive. "He claimed he was in transition, moving to a quieter place to find peace. He had a way about him, though, something that felt strained." Clark explained that the man who gave his name as Father John didn't stay long. "I let him spend the night in the rectory, but by morning he was gone. No goodbye, no thank you, just vanished." When asked if Father Matthew could recall anything else unusual, he hesitated. "There's one thing, before he left I noticed he'd taken a pair of our older ceremonial robes. You know, the kinds we don't use anymore. They weren't valuable and I figured maybe he needed them more than we did. But now," he trailed off, his expression growing stormy. These faint, disjointed clues painted a picture of a man not confined by the structure of the church but someone who used its image to deceive, to prey. Townsend began referring to him in her notes as an imposter priest, an identity as fluid and changeable as smoke. Every sighting seemed to place him somewhere new, outside the grasp of Shadywood's increasingly desperate law enforcement. "Whoever he is," Townsend remarked during one team meeting, "he knows how to blend in. The robes, the cross, the chants, they're not just costumes, they're tools, and he wields them like a craftsman." But Townsend knew tools weren't enough. There was intent behind them, a method to the madness. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just passing through Shadywood. He was planning, hunting, and waiting. Every lead brought the police closer to understanding one chilling truth. This priest was no holy man. He wasn't saving souls. He was destroying them. The string of crimes comes to light. As the warm days of May began to break through the damp chill of early spring, Shadywood Forest held fast to its dark secrets. But the peace of the small Oregon town was about to shatter again. On the morning of May 15th, two hikers stumbled upon a gruesome discovery. Two lifeless bodies hidden deep within the ruins of the abandoned St. Mark's Chapel. The bodies belonged to Becca Moore, a 26-year-old nursing assistant, and Olivia Price, a 30-year-old bookshop owner. Both women had been missing for several weeks, and their disappearances had gone largely unnoticed amidst the spike of ongoing cases. Now, faced with undeniable evidence of their tragic fates, the community found itself staring directly into the abyss of a killer's escalating depravity. The scene at St. Mark's detectives and forensic teams descended upon the chapel ruins within hours of the hikers' call. What they found chilled even the most seasoned investigators. Both women had been strangled, with ligature marks cutting deep into their necks. Their wrists and ankles were bruised, suggesting they'd been bound for an extended period. The state of their clothing told another horrific story. It was clear they had been assaulted before their deaths. But the most alarming detail was what was found beside each body, a small handcrafted card with elaborate calligraphy, inscribed with phrases such as, "Fear not the Lord's reckoning," and "Your sins are absolved in death." Each card had a faded hand-drawn crucifix stamped at the bottom, as if marking the signature of the killer. This wasn't just murder, it was carefully staged, deliberate, and depraved. Detective Sarah Townsend stood quietly by the crumbling chapel wall, her mind racing as the bodies were covered and transferred from the scene. "We're dealing with someone certain of their purpose," she later told reporters. "This is ritualistic, calculated, they're not killing people, they're making some kind of twisted statement." Patterns and escalation. The double murder confirmed what authorities had feared since the discovery of Denise Carter's body in the creek. A serial killer was at large, and they were growing bolder. Unlike Denise's case, which could have been dismissed initially as an isolated event, the staged murders of Becca and Olivia at a symbolic location like St. Mark's painted a clear picture. The killer wanted attention. They wanted the world to know that these crimes were purposeful. A profiler brought in by the FBI quickly highlighted key patterns in the killer's methodology. "This isn't random targeting," said Agent David Snyder, a behavioral analyst specializing in serial crimes. "The victims are women in their 20s or 30s, often alone and perceived to be spiritually vulnerable in some way. The killer is staging these crimes to appear as acts of divine judgment, but make no mistake, this isn't about religion, this is about control." Townsend's team worked tirelessly to identify the connection between the victims, but no clear link emerged. Denise had been a passionate teacher, Samantha a college student, Vanessa a florist, and now Becca and Olivia. Their lives had seemingly little in common. However, one factor stood out. All had either entered Shadywood Forest willingly, or had been lured there under false pretenses. And all had either been sighted near the chapel, or discovered there, after death. Fear ripples through the community. News of the St. Mark's double homicide sent waves of panic through Shadywood. Nearly overnight, the tension that had simmered since the first disappearances reached a boiling point. Parents refused to let their children out of sight. Local businesses hung signs warning against hiking the forest trails, and organized search parties grew smaller as fear overtook volunteer spirit. Even seasoned hikers began avoiding the woods altogether, and those who did venture in carried pepper spray or pocket knives, uneasy at every snap of a twig. Church services saw an uptick in attendance, as families sought solace in prayer. Ironically, the very image of the cross, the killer's supposed signature, became a source of unease. Nobody felt safe, and whispers about the killer's identity spiraled. Was it really just one man? Could he have accomplices hidden deeper in the forest? Or was there some deeper, more supernatural force at work? "It's like a shadow's taken root in this town," said Sandra Morris, a local shopkeeper whose uncle had been part of the latest search effort. "We used to love Shadywood. It's where we camped, celebrated birthdays, went to breathe. Now it's like the forest is thirsty for blood. Additional clues point to the killer's mindset." The handcrafted cards found at the crime scene, with their macabre messages, were sent to FBI labs for further analysis. Investigators found indentations left by the killer's heavy hand, suggesting the inscriptions had been written with a fountain pen over crudely cut cardstock. Chemical testing found faint traces of candle wax on the edges of each card, a likely indication they had been prepared in the dim light of the chapel ruins. This added weight to the theory that the killer was using St. Mark's as a private sanctuary for their twisted rituals. Meanwhile, patrols around the chapel uncovered additional evidence suggesting the killer's escalating boldness. Officers found clusters of extinguished candles, semi-burned Bibles, and, perhaps most chilling, a pair of women's running shoes stuffed out of sight behind the old pews. The shoes matched the description of Heather Graham's, the missing photographer whose Polaroid camera had been left near a trail bench weeks before. "What terrifies me most," Townsend admitted in a late-night strategy meeting, "is how deliberate every single piece of this puzzle is. He's not careless, he's not frantic. Whoever this killer is, he's meticulous. It's like he wants us to know, but only on his terms." Community outrage demands action. By now the residents of Shadywood were demanding more drastic measures. At another town hall meeting, anger erupted as citizens demanded that the local authorities close the forest indefinitely and assign more resources to the investigation. "How many more women are we going to lose?" shouted one resident, slamming his fist on the table. Others voiced frustration with police progress, pushing for state and federal agencies to escalate their involvement. Under growing pressure, Townsend's office issued tighter restrictions around the forest, stationing patrol officers at every major trailhead and closing several unmarked paths entirely. While this calmed some fears, an unnerving truth lingered. The killer knew Shadywood Forest better than anyone chasing him. It was his domain, his battlefield, and every step forward felt like playing directly into his hands. The fear becomes personal. For Townsend, the case stopped being just another job and became deeply personal. Every tip, every dead lead weighed heavily on her as she pored over notes late into the night. "I see their faces in my sleep," she confided to a fellow investigator. "The victims, their families, even the suspect, were tangled in his web so tight I can barely breathe some days." But Townsend knew that as the killer continued to escalate, the stakes only grew higher. What started as whispers of disappearances was now a full-blown nightmare. The priest of Shadywood had lurched out of the shadows as a calculated, sadistic force, and he wasn't going to stop. And deep down, one question haunted Townsend more than any other. How much closer was he already to his next victim? The dark psychology of the villain. As the investigation delved deeper into the chilling series of murders, one question loomed over the minds of Detective Sarah Townsend, her team, and the Shadywood community. What kind of person could be capable of such calculated cruelty? To understand the killer, they had to step into his mind, a dark and twisted place where the lines between reality and delusion blurred dangerously. From the very beginning, it was clear that the so-called priest of Shadywood wasn't committing random acts of violence. Every victim, every detail, from the victim's bindings to the hand-lettered messages left behind, spoke of someone who believed their actions carried profound meaning. But what was that meaning? Was it religious fanaticism, a distorted savior complex, or something even darker? The path to understanding the killer wasn't just about catching him, it was about revealing his purpose. A predator lurking in the labyrinth of faith. Early profiling efforts painted a disturbing picture of the killer's psyche. He seemed to view himself as a kind of divine judge, someone appointed to cleanse the weak and sinful. The hand-lettered notes left at the crime scenes were filled with biblical references, though warped and taken egregiously out of context. Phrases like, "The Lord shall pass judgment upon the unworthy," and "In death you are set free from your sin," revealed a man deeply entrenched in his own fabricated theology. Each crime was ritualistic, mirroring a distorted form of repentance as viewed through the killer's corrosive ideology. "It's almost like he's acting out a savior fantasy, but with a horrifying twist," FBI behavioral analyst David Snyder said during a press briefing. "He sees himself as the hand of divine punishment, but he's also toying with his victims, binding them, stalking them, making sure they're at their most vulnerable. There's nothing compassionate about what he does. It's control disguised as religious fervor. His use of a priestly persona only added to the complexity of his motives. To many experts it was clear this wasn't about genuine faith. The robes, the cross, the Latin scriptures murmured to his prey. They were tools, disguises meant to evoke trust or paralyze fear. He used the comforting image of a religious figure to mask his darkest intentions. But what drove him to pick this facade of all things? Townsend and her team combed through religious records and outreach centers, hoping to find hints of his origins or a reason for his chosen persona. But most trails ran cold. The seeds of hatred, a troubled past. As the investigation uncovered clues from other towns and regions, they began piecing together more about the killer's likely past. Witness interviews suggested the priest could have once lived in poverty, struggling through a transient lifestyle of homelessness. Records from shelters painted a consistent yet chilling pattern. A man fitting the description of their suspect had frequented church-run meal programs but often left feeling rejected. Some volunteers described him as quiet but strange, citing how he occasionally muttered Bible verses under his breath, often mixing them with odd, threatening phrases. One shelter volunteer from a nearby town named Carol recalled her interaction vividly. He would sit in the back during meals, head down, clutching a Bible that looked about as old as he was. He wouldn't talk much, but when he did, it wasn't normal conversation. Once I offered to help him find more permanent housing and he just snapped. Said something about how people like me were already damned and unworthy. It was unsettling. Investigators believed these frequent rejections from the very institution he idolized, organized religion, may have planted the seeds of his hatred. His anger didn't manifest as overt violence at first, but instead simmered for years, growing with every perceived slight. The idea of being cast out by the church fueled a dangerous sense of entitlement and vengeance. It was as if in his mind, he had turned the role of priesthood into one of righteous judge and executioner, taking the mantle no one had given him, and twisting it to fit his destructive desires. The villain's obsession with control. Another crucial aspect of the killer's psychology was his obsession with control. Every facet of his crimes, his ability to stalk his victims without being detected, the meticulous staging of the crime scenes, and the notes filled with dark proclamations, pointed to a man desperate for power over others. His victims were carefully selected, their final moments choreographed to serve his narrative of judgment and absolution. Control is the root of his behavior, Snyder explained. It's not about religion, it's about using religion as a tool to exert dominance. He chooses vulnerable women, often alone, likely because he knows he can overpower them physically and mentally. By leaving messages that distort scripture, he's reinforcing his belief that he is the one in charge, not God. Even the locations served his need for control. St. Mark's Chapel, an abandoned and decrepit site, was both symbolic and practical. It represented a perverted altar of sacrifice while also providing him with a hidden lair, away from prying eyes. Similarly, the remoteness of Shadywood Forest gave him the perfect hunting ground, a place where he could operate without interference, manipulating the isolation and fear of his victims. Words as weapons, the role of manipulation. One of the most chilling elements investigators unearthed was how the killer used his words as weapons. Survivors who had narrowly escaped encounters with the man described his unsettling calmness, his soothing yet hollow voice as he spoke. Whether it was inviting them to pray with him or asking cryptic questions about their lives, everything he said seemed carefully chosen to disarm his prey. Lucy Miller, the backpacker who evaded him, described the way he asked her to find the light and join him on a path to salvation. It didn't sound like an invitation, it felt more like a command, she told Townsend. It was like he needed me to say yes, like he couldn't move on unless I agreed to his terms. It wasn't just creepy, it was paralyzing. This manipulative approach wasn't limited to verbal interaction, it extended to the notes he left behind. The phrases were written not just for his victims but for those who found them, investigators, reporters, even the public. They were meant to unsettle, to make people question his motives and fear what else he might be capable of. The combination of calculated words and physical violence painted a terrifying picture of a predator who thrived on psychological dominance as much as the acts of murder themselves. The shattered mirrors of identity. In her quiet moments, Detective Townsend found herself plagued by one question above all. Was this man born a monster, or did life shape him into one? His facade of a religious figure hinted at deeper fractures in his identity. How much of the priest was real, and how much was performance? Was there even a man left underneath the layers of delusion, or had he become nothing but the mask he wore? As Townsend stared at the growing profile pinned to the board in the precinct, she couldn't shake the image of him wandering through the forest, the black robe swaying as he picked his next victim. He was a man unmoored from reality, a misguided hunter chasing some twisted form of validation. For him, the murders weren't just acts of violence, they were sermons, and in his sermons, the only salvation lay in fear, silence, and death. "I don't know if we can catch him," she admitted to her partner late one night, gripping a cold cup of coffee, "because I don't think he wants to be caught. This isn't a man who slips up. This is someone who believes he's above the rules of the world entirely." One thing was certain, the priest of Shadywood wasn't just a killer. He was a fractured mirror of everything humanity fears. And as the shadows around the forest grew darker, the chilling question echoed louder than ever. How much further would he take his crusade before he was stopped? The comprehensive manhunt. By June 2019, the patience of both Shadywood's residents and law enforcement had reached its breaking point. The discovery of multiple bodies, the growing fear gripping the small community, and the elusive, almost ghostly profile of the so-called priest of Shadywood combined into an unstoppable momentum. It was time to move beyond passive patrols and scattered clues. This was war. Shadywood Forest, vast and unforgiving, was about to become the center of one of the largest manhunts the state of Oregon had ever seen. Detective Sarah Townsend, now bearing the exhausting weight of months of investigation, led the charge. The stakes had never felt higher. For every day that the killer remained free, fear festered among the townsfolk, and the odds that another life would be taken grew ever larger. Everything, resources, people, even public faith, was on the line. Preparing for the hunt. The plan had to be massive. Shadywood Forest stretched across hundreds of square miles, dense with towering evergreens, narrow winding trails, and rocky outcroppings that were perfect hiding spots. Townsend and her team knew that if the murderer truly was hiding in the forest, he had the home field advantage. But their growing understanding of his methods gave them hope. They believed he would eventually return to his comfort zones, the chapel ruins, the hidden, overgrown trails, and perhaps even the homes on the outskirts of the woods. With the help of Oregon State Police and the FBI, Townsend organized a task force unlike anything Shadywood had seen before. Over 50 officers, investigators, and tracking experts were involved, supported by K-9 units trained to detect human scents. Drones equipped with thermal imaging technology were brought in to scan the forest canopy and its dense undergrowth, mapping areas that had long been untouched by hikers or adventurers. "We leave no stone unturned," Townsend told the task force at their final briefing before the operation began. "We know he's out there, we know the kinds of places he chooses, and we know he's watching. But this time, we're watching back. We'll track him, corner him, and bring this nightmare to an end." Law enforcement also engaged with civilians, asking for their cooperation in monitoring their property, reporting suspicious activity, and avoiding forest trails. No exceptions. Temporary trail closures were announced, frustrating avid hikers but reassuring families desperate to keep their loved ones safe. The forest turns into a battlefield. The manhunt began on June 3, 2019, with groups of officers fanning out across the forest. The first phase of the search focused on key areas: the ruins of St. Mark's Chapel, the East Loop Trail where sightings of the priest had been reported, and a network of hunting cabins and abandoned structures deep within the forest. With each step into the woods, officers pushed through tangled vegetation and examined even the smallest disturbances in the soil. Each misplaced rock, each crushed leaf, could mean something. Tracking teams followed faint trails of boot prints and scattered remnants of human activity. An empty tin can here, the stub of a candle there. The signs were frustratingly faint, as though the forest itself had conspired to erase the movements of the killer. Around the edges of the operation, drones began their scans, their thermal imaging cameras working tirelessly to detect any hint of unusual warmth in the otherwise cold forest floor. These drones were particularly effective at examining places where the officers struggled to go. Cliffside ledges, marshy clearings, dense thickets that seemed impenetrable. Tensions remained high. Decades of stories about Shadywood's eerie history fed the imaginations of those involved in the search. Every time an officer thought they saw a shadow move or heard an unexpected crunch beneath their boots, a shiver ran down their spines. Even the K-9 units seemed uneasy. Handlers reported that the dogs would occasionally stop, ears pricked, as if sensing an unseen presence. "He's out here," Townsend said to her deputy after hours of combing through one potential lead. "I can feel it. He's hiding, but he's watching. We just have to figure out where he's going to strike next." Decoys in action. The trap is set. Frustration with the slow progress of the search led Townsend to devise a risky, controversial strategy, using decoys. Female officers from the task force volunteered to pose as solo hikers or joggers, walking the trails where the killer was most likely to strike. Their routes were carefully planned, with plainclothes officers shadowing them at a distance and concealed patrol units stationed within minutes of each potential danger zone. It was a gamble, and Townsend hated putting her team in harm's way, but it was the most direct plan they had. "Everything about him tells us he thrives on hunting women who appear vulnerable," Townsend said to the team during a briefing. "This isn't about baiting him. It's about being ready, one step ahead." The decoys began their work on June 10th. Each step along the forest trails felt heavy with suspense. Hidden earpieces kept the decoys connected to their backup teams, who watched from rocky overlooks and camouflaged vehicles. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch sent ripples of adrenaline through the operation. For days, the tactic produced no results. But on the evening of June 15th, as the forest was bathed in the orange glow of a setting sun, one decoy's earpiece crackled to life. "I've got someone following me," she whispered, her voice tight. "Black robes, Bible, wooden cross in his hand. He matches the description." The tension skyrocketed. Townsend, monitoring the operation from a nearby command center, sprang into action. Units were dispatched immediately to converge on the decoy's location, their vehicles tearing through dirt trails and uneven paths. The decoy continued walking calmly, playing her role, even as her shadow moved closer. Then, just as the backup team was closing in, the figure disappeared, vanishing into the thick underbrush as though he'd melted into the forest itself. Officers searched the surrounding area well into the night, but he was gone. Signs of a predator. The near miss wasn't a total loss. In the area where he had last been seen, officers found fresh boot prints, scraps of fabric that might have been from his robes, and a crudely carved wooden cross partially buried in the soil. Dusting the cross for fingerprints yielded nothing, but the discovery reinforced the belief that the killer felt some twisted attachment to his surroundings, as if leaving behind his mark gave him a sense of power. "We're closing in on him," Townsend told her exhausted team. "We rattled him tonight. He knows we're not giving up." The officer's determination only grew from that point. Additional drones were deployed and tracking dogs were given the scent of the cross in hopes of tracing his next move. Meanwhile, Townsend worked tirelessly to connect the latest clues to the events surrounding St. Mark's Chapel and the earlier murders. Every piece of evidence, no matter how minor, felt like another step toward bringing this nightmare to an end. Desperate measures in desperate times. As June wore on, Townsend felt the pressure building. The town wanted results, the families of the victims demanded justice, and yet the manhunt dragged on in the unforgiving wilderness. Fatigue seeped into her team, but she refused to let morale falter. "We catch this man, or we fail everyone who has suffered," she told the task force in a rare moment of vulnerability. "Failure isn't an option." Despite the frustration, Townsend knew the killer's arrogance would eventually betray him. His confident stalking, his habit of leaving behind symbolic items, even his refusal to flee the Shadywood area, all of it pointed to a man who believed he was untouchable. And Townsend was determined to prove him wrong. A survivor emerges. On the evening of July 3, 2019, a miracle came out of the shadows of Shadywood Forest. A survivor. Chloe Jackson, a 25-year-old local barista, stumbled into the parking lot of a Shadywood Forest trailhead. She was bruised, battered, and trembling, but she was alive, against all odds. Chloe's survival was not only a breakthrough for law enforcement, but also a sliver of hope for a town drowning in fear. The moment she appeared, a bystander called emergency services. Within minutes, both paramedics and officers from Detective Sarah Townsend's team arrived. Chloe clutched a torn strap from her backpack, her lips cracked and bloody as she tried to speak. The words she managed to string together sent chills down their spines. "He was going to kill me. The priest. I got away." Chloe's harrowing ordeal. Once stabilized at the hospital, Chloe's recounting of her ordeal shocked detectives. Earlier that day, Chloe had decided to take a hike to clear her head after a stressful week at work. She had heard the rumors about the so-called priest of Shadywood, but like many in town, she didn't fully believe them. With the summer sun lighting up the forest trails, she felt confident and safe, until she realized she wasn't alone. "He was waiting for me," Chloe told detectives, her voice trembling but determined. "I don't know where he came from, I didn't hear him. One minute I was tying my shoe, and the next he was there standing on the trail behind me." She described his appearance as eerily calm, black robes flowing around him, a wooden cross dangling from his neck, and an ancient Bible clutched tightly in his hand. "He looked just like everyone said, pale, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. His smile, it wasn't human, it felt like he was looking through me, not at me." Chloe recounted how he greeted her with a soft voice. He said, "You're lost, child, let me guide you." At first Chloe thought he might have been some wandering preacher out of touch with the rumors swirling around town. But as he stepped closer, she saw the sharpness in his eyes. There was no comfort in his demeanor, only a predator's intent. The fight for survival. The encounter quickly turned hostile. Chloe, sensing the danger, tried to step away, but the man lunged for her, pinning her against the rough bark of a nearby tree. "He was stronger than he looked," Chloe said, fighting back tears. "I couldn't move. He was whispering things in this low voice, Bible verses but twisted, things about sin and how he could save me. It was like he was trying to hypnotize me." In his other hand he clutched a coarse rope, which he looped around her wrist before she managed to shove him backward with all her strength. She barely had time to run before she heard him following her, his heavy, deliberate footsteps crashing through the underbrush. "It wasn't like he was chasing me, not in the normal way," Chloe explained. "It was like he knew I wouldn't get far. He walked slowly, like he was savoring it." For what felt like an eternity, Chloe sprinted through the maze of trees, her lungs screaming for air. Twigs snapped beneath her feet and the thorns of low-hanging branches tore at her skin. No matter how fast she ran, his presence lingered, always a few steps behind, always just out of her sight. As she neared the edge of a steep ravine, Chloe made a split-second decision. With no other options, she leapt, tumbling down the rocky slope and landing painfully in the shallow stream below. The fall left her scraped and bruised, but it gave her just enough cover to evade him. She crawled into the shadows of the brush and waited, holding her breath as she listened to his footsteps above. "He stood there right at the edge of the ravine," Chloe said. "He was mumbling something, maybe praying, I don't know, but I stayed as still as I could. I thought, if he climbs down here, I'm dead." Eventually the footsteps faded, and Chloe, half limping, half crawling, made her way downstream until she reached the trailhead where she was found. Clues from the survivor Chloe's escape not only gave the town its first survivor but also provided critical insight into the killer's behavior. In her detailed account to Detective Townsend, she highlighted several key characteristics. 1. Chloe described the way he spoke as unsettlingly soft yet filled with menace. He wasn't yelling or threatening outright. He sounded like he believed everything he was saying, like he truly thought he was saving me in some sick, twisted way. 2. For a man who looked thin and somewhat frail beneath his robes, Chloe was shocked by his sheer strength. He grabbed me like he'd done it 100 times before, like he knew exactly how to stop someone from fighting back. 3. The rope he carried wasn't accidental. It was frayed, but clearly functional. The way he looped it around her wrist quickly and effortlessly suggested he'd practiced on previous victims. 4. The fact that he didn't chase her outright but instead followed deliberately pointed towards someone who enjoyed psychological dominance. It was like he wanted me to know that no matter where I ran, I couldn't get away. The town's shock and relief. When news of Chloe's survival broke, it sent shockwaves through Shadywood. For the first time in months there was a thread of hope, but it was tempered by the horrifying realization of how close she had come to becoming another victim. Families gathered at the hospital to offer support, while reporters from local and national outlets flocked to the scene, desperate to interview the brave young woman who had escaped the infamous priest of Shadywood. Chloe, for her part, remained composed yet shaken. "I'm just glad I'm alive," she told a reporter from the local paper, "but I'm not the only one he's taken. We need to stop him before someone else isn't as lucky as me." Detective Townsend, while relieved to have a living witness, knew the survivor's testimony was both a blessing and a curse. Chloe's first-hand account had confirmed the growing profile of the killer, but it also reinforced his unpredictability and unrelenting nature. He had slipped away again, leaving only fear and unanswered questions in his wake. A new determination. Chloe's escape galvanized the investigation like never before. Townsend and her team examined every inch of the ravine and surrounding trails for signs of the killer, but he had vanished like a ghost. Nevertheless, Chloe's description, combined with the physical evidence of her injuries and trauma, provided a clearer picture of their quarry. Forensics also gathered soil samples from Chloe's clothing, hoping to cross-reference it with any known locations that matched the terrain. Meanwhile, behavioral analysts re-evaluated the killer's patterns, theorizing that his approach was becoming more direct, more desperate. Townsend couldn't shake the feeling that Chloe's narrow escape had rattled him, perhaps forcing him to act even more erratically, a town on edge. Even with a survivor in their midst, Shadywood's residents remained on edge. The fact that the killer had been so close to claiming yet another victim unnerved everyone. Parents doubled down on restrictions, businesses near the forest put up warning signs, and trail closures extended further than ever. "He's still out there," Chloe reminded detectives before leaving the hospital. "I could hear it in his voice. He's not finished." Her words lingered in Townsend's mind. Chloe's survival wasn't just a victory, it was a turning point. If they were going to catch the monster stalking Shadywood, it was now or never. The hunt had never felt more urgent. The sophisticated trap is set. The escape of Chloe Jackson was both a blessing and a wake-up call for Detective Sarah Townsend and her team. Chloe's survival handed them invaluable insight into the killer's methods, but it also underscored something terrifying. The priest of Shadywood was emboldened. He wasn't retreating, and he wouldn't stop on his own. If they didn't act decisively and quickly, someone else might not be as lucky as Chloe. A full month of exhaustive investigations, drone sweeps, and search parties hadn't led to an arrest. The manhunt had only chipped away at the patience of a terrified town. By mid-July 2019, the grim realization settled over the task force. Conventional methods weren't going to work. To capture the priest, they needed to think like him, predict his next move, and set a trap he could not resist. It wouldn't be easy. Law enforcement in Shadywood was up against a man who knew the forest better than anyone. Someone who had eluded them for months and seemed to thrive on fear and control. But Townsend and her team had an advantage now. They'd studied him. They knew his patterns, his tendencies, his preferred tactics. It was time to turn the tables. The bait is chosen. The plan was audacious, almost desperate. They'd use another vulnerable hiker as bait, a lone traveler who fit the victim profile. But this time the woman wouldn't truly be alone. Townsend carefully selected one of her most skilled officers, Rachel Perez, for the job. Perez had an extensive background in undercover work and self-defense, making her the ideal candidate to embody the priest's preferred target without actually being defenseless. Perez's mission was simple in theory, but chilling in practice. Walk the same trails where Chloe had been attacked, mimic the behavior of a solo hiker, and lure the priest into revealing himself. Townsend was uneasy about the danger involved, but Perez had volunteered without hesitation. "If this puts an end to it," she told her superior, "then I'll do whatever it takes." The operation required meticulous preparation. Perez would carry a concealed earpiece to stay in contact with the task force at all times, along with a communication button discreetly sewn into her sleeve, which she could activate at the first sign of trouble. Backup teams were strategically stationed at various choke points along the forest trails, hidden among the trees and thickets. Drones buzzed high above to act as extra sets of eyes, ready to track any movement. K-9 units were on standby, and patrol vehicles were positioned at key exits from the forest, ensuring that any attempt to flee would lead the killer straight into custody. "We can't afford any mistakes," Townsend told her team during the final briefing. "If he shows himself, we seize the opportunity immediately. No hesitation, no overthinking. We stop him right then and there. The moment he feels pressured, he's going to melt into the forest like he always does." The dangerous waiting game. On July 15, 2019, the trap was set. Officer Perez entered Shadywood Forest just after sunrise, wearing a simple hiking outfit and carrying a small backpack to complete the illusion of a casual traveler. She kept her pace slow and deliberate, stopping occasionally to take photos on her phone, tie her shoelaces, or drink from her water bottle. Small movements designed to make her seem alone and distracted, the kind of behavior that had drawn in the priest's previous victims. All the while, the forest around her crawled with unseen law enforcement. Officers hidden in dense underbrush monitored her progress through long-range binoculars. Backup teams communicated in low whispers through their radios, tracking Perez's every step. A drone moved silently overhead, its thermal imaging camera scanning for any sign of human movement other than Perez herself. For 8 hours the forest was impossibly quiet, its usual symphony of chirping birds and rustling leaves muffled by the tension hanging in the air. Townsend paced near the command center, headphones clamped tightly over her ears as she listened to the faint sound of Perez's breathing through the earpiece. But the priest didn't appear, not in the morning, not in the early afternoon. As the hours dragged on, moments of doubt began to creep into the team's collective thoughts. What if he had sensed the trap? What if he was watching from a distance, biding his time like he always did? Or worse, what if he was already somewhere else in the forest, stalking another victim while their attention was focused on Perez? As the sun began to dip low on the horizon, painting the trees in long shadows, Townsend whispered into Perez's earpiece, "Give it another hour, then we pull back for the day." A chilling encounter. Then, with less than 20 minutes left on the clock, Perez's troubled voice crackled through the radio. "I think I've got something!" Instantly Townsend straightened, her heart pounding. "What do you see?" Perez's voice was low but steady. "There's a man, black robes. He's behind me, maybe 50 yards down the trail. He's walking slow. Same description as Chloe gave us, the cross, the Bible, everything." The command center erupted into action. Townsend called for all surrounding units to tighten their perimeter as the drone above pivoted to lock onto Perez's position. Backup teams began silently advancing toward the trail, their weapons drawn, their boots barely making a sound against the forest floor. "Stay calm," Townsend instructed Perez through the radio. "Keep walking, don't let him know you've seen him, we've got eyes on you." Perez continued to move forward, her breathing audible through the earpiece. "He's getting closer," she murmured after a moment. "I can hear him, he's muttering something." The backup teams were within striking distance now. Townsend gripped the edge of the table in the command center, her knuckles white. "Just a little longer," she said softly, almost to herself. Then, something unexpected happened. The man stopped. Through the drone's camera feed, Townsend saw the robed figure tilt his head, as if sensing something was wrong. He stood frozen for a moment, his face obscured by the shadows of the trees, before suddenly ducking into the underbrush and disappearing from view. "He's running!" Perez called urgently, her voice cutting through the command center like a knife. "The chase begins." Officers sprang into action, fanning out in a coordinated pursuit. The drone locked onto the fleeing figure's heat signature, tracking him as he darted through the dense forest. Despite his robes, the priest moved with astonishing speed and agility, weaving between trees and leaping over obstacles as though the wilderness itself obeyed him. K-9 units were released, their handlers sprinting to keep pace as the dogs followed the scent trail. The thick underbrush whipped at the officers' arms and legs, but they pushed forward relentlessly, their flashlights cutting through the growing darkness. Townsend barked orders into her radio from the command center, adrenaline firing through her veins. "Cut him off at the north ridge, block the trail near the chapel ruins, do not let him reach the ravine." But the priest was cunning. He doubled back, slipping through gaps in the perimeter, and forcing the officers to change their strategy on the fly. For every step they gained he seemed to take two, his knowledge of the forest unmatched. Finally, after what felt like an endless chase, the drone operator shouted over the radio, "He's slowing down! North quadrant, near the old hunting cabin!" Cornered at last. The task force converged on the cabin with precision, surrounding it from all sides. Townsend joined the ground team, her flashlight sweeping over the weathered structure as she approached. Heart pounding, gun drawn, she called out into the silence, "This is Detective Townsend, there's nowhere left to run, step out with your hands up!" For a long moment nothing happened. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then the door creaked open. "The villain is captured." The air outside the hunting cabin was thick with tension, heavy enough to choke. Detective Sarah Townsend held her breath as the creaky wooden door swung open ever so slowly, groaning as though the old structure itself was reluctant to give up its secrets. The figure who stepped out of the shadows confirmed every fear, every whispered rumor the residents of Shadywood had harbored for months. Here he was, the so-called priest of Shadywood. The man who had haunted the town, claimed lives in his twisted pursuit of purpose, and turned peace into paranoia. His black robes hung loose around his thin frame, dirt and sweat staining the fabric as though he had not taken them off in months. His face, pale and hollow, was sunken at the cheeks. His gray, disheveled hair framed piercing blue eyes that were at once vacant and eerily intense. He looked more like a creature of folklore than a human being, but there he was, flesh and blood, and very much alive. In one hand he clutched what looked like an ancient Bible, its cover tattered and edges worn smooth from constant handling. In the other hand dangled his signature wooden cross, a symbol that had become synonymous with terror across Shadywood, the dangerous standoff. For a long beat, no one moved. Townsend didn't dare blink as she raised her gun, her voice firm but straining to rise above the adrenaline coursing through her. "This is the end of the line. Put the weapon on the ground. Step forward with your hands where we can see them." The man didn't respond immediately. He tilted his head in a disturbingly childlike manner as if considering her words, then let out a low, chilling chuckle. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to send shivers down the spines of every officer present. "You speak with such authority, detective," he said softly, his voice hoarse yet strangely calm. "But do you truly understand whose authority you defy?" Townsend tightened her grip on her firearm, but refused to engage in his rhetoric. "Drop whatever's in your hands and get on your knees, now." "I am but a servant," he continued, ignoring the raised weapons and barking commands around him. "A humble vessel for justice, for cleansing." Then, in one swift movement, he lifted the cross in his hand with such speed that for a moment, Townsend thought he might charge. "Weapon!" one officer shouted, stepping forward to fire. "Hold fire!" Townsend snapped, seeing through the illusion. The wooden cross wasn't a weapon, it was exactly what it appeared to be, a perverse relic of his deadly games. She was certain he wanted them to overreact, to gun him down and turn him into some kind of martyr for his imagined mission. But Townsend refused to give him that satisfaction. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, her voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. "You're no vessel, no servant. You're just a man, a weak, cowardly man hiding behind symbols you don't even believe in." She stepped closer, daring to meet his gaze head-on. Behind her the tactical team was tightening their circle, waiting for her signal. "All those women, their lives were worth more than your fantasies, and now, it's over." Something in her words seemed to pierce through his quiet facade. The smirk faltered for the briefest moment, replaced by a flicker of doubt. His lips began to tremble as if he were trying to say something but struggling to find the words. Then, without warning, he dropped the cross and Bible to the ground, raising his hands above his head. The cabin door creaked ominously behind him, as though mourning the end of his sanctuary. The officers surged forward, securing his arms and forcing him to the ground. As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Townsend felt an immense wave of relief, but it was far from triumph. The monster of Shadywood had been caught, but the scars he left on the town would linger for years, perhaps decades. The arrest and revelation. Once the man was secured, K-9 units were sent into the cabin to root out any unseen dangers or additional clues. Meanwhile, officers searched his person, finding a sharpened hunting knife concealed beneath his robe and a small handwritten notebook tucked into his waistband. The notebook was immediately labeled evidence, and Townsend flipped through its pages with gloved hands. Inside were verses of scripture carefully written by hand, but they were not standard biblical passages. They'd been twisted, rewritten to fit the killer's delusional sense of justice. When asked to confirm his identity, the man remained silent as he was escorted to a waiting patrol vehicle. He didn't struggle, didn't lash out or plea for mercy. Instead, he held his head high, as if proud of what he had accomplished. To Townsend, his self-proclaimed righteousness was more vile than any outburst ever could have been. By the time they arrived at the precinct, Townsend learned his name, Ronald Garrick, 51 years old. Formerly a drifter, he had worked odd jobs across Oregon and Washington before gravitating toward transient shelters connected to church outreach programs. His records revealed scattered accusations of inappropriate behavior, but none were serious enough at the time to result in charges. Somewhere along the line, perhaps a culmination of personal failures, rejection, and brewing anger, Ronald had spiraled into the monster they'd captured that night. The evidence unfolds. The search of the hunting cabin revealed even darker truths. Beside a neatly arranged pile of extinguished candles sat rolls of rope stained with what investigators later confirmed to be traces of blood. Strewn about the room were artifacts of the missing victims: Samantha Pierce's crumpled journal, Vanessa Harper's bracelet, Heather Graham's scarf. These items, once cherished by their owners, had been transformed into trophies for Ronald's depraved sense of power. Most chilling of all were several Polaroid photographs tacked to a wooden board near the cabin's far wall. Each showed his victims in various states of vulnerability, some tied and restrained, others appearing unaware they were being watched. The photographs proved invaluable for the investigation, but left every officer who saw them shaken to the core. "This is his shrine," Townsend muttered as she stood amidst the chaos of the cabin. "It's where he turned his delusions into reality." The villain's words. During hours of interrogation, Ronald remained mostly uncooperative, speaking in cryptic phrases that investigators struggled to unravel. He referred to himself only as the messenger, and claimed his purpose was to carry out the work that others feared. When pressed about the women he murdered, he would only repeat, "I absolve them, they are free now." Townsend sat across from him during one of his final interviews, gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You didn't free anyone, you didn't absolve anyone, you murdered them, and now you're going to pay for every single life you took." To that, Ronald merely smiled, leaning back in his chair. "I did what had to be done," he said softly. "You'll see one day. They'll all see." The town reacts. News of Ronald Garrick's capture spread quickly, sending ripples of relief and unease through Shadywood. The small town, which had been gripped by fear for months, finally began to breathe again. Families of the victims gathered at the precinct to express their gratitude but also to demand justice. Memorials popped up around the trailheads, with flowers, candles, and photographs of the women whose lives had been stolen. "He doesn't deserve mercy," one grieving parent said during a press interview. "He deserves to rot for everything he's done." For Townsend, the arrest was bittersweet. Ronald Garrick had been taken off the streets, his reign of terror brought to an end, but it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. The lives lost could never be returned, and the scars left by his crimes would haunt the town forever. The final chapter of fear. Ronald Garrick now sat in a maximum security prison awaiting trial, but even behind bars, his shadow loomed large over Shadywood. Investigators combed through every detail of his life, hoping to tie him to additional cases or uncover the origins of his twisted beliefs. Townsend, meanwhile, returned to the quiet of her home one evening, pouring herself a glass of whiskey and easing into her chair. Her eyes rested on the case files spread across the table, but for the first time the weight seemed a little lighter. "You're done," she muttered under her breath as if addressing Ronald himself. "No more running, no more fear." Still, she couldn't shake one lingering question. Was it truly over? The historic trial. The trial of Ronald Garrick, better known to the nation as the Priest of Shadywood, began on October 20th, 2019, under a barrage of media attention and public scrutiny. For months, his chilling crimes had captivated and horrified the country in equal measure. Now, as he stood before the court, the entire nation watched, waiting to see if justice would truly be served for the women whose lives he had stolen. It wasn't just another trial, it was a reckoning. For the families of the victims, it was a chance to confront the man who had shattered their world. For Shadywood, it marked the first step toward healing from an unspeakable tragedy. And for law enforcement, particularly Detective Sarah Townsend, it was the culmination of months of relentless pursuit, a battle fought in the shadows of the forest and in the depths of their souls. A courtroom unlike any other. The courtroom in Portland was transformed into a fortress. Security was tightened following threats of violence from hate groups and conspiracy theorists who saw Ronald Garrick as a deluded savior or claimed he had been framed. Metal detectors lined the entrances, bomb-sniffing dogs were stationed by the exits, and the presence of armed guards throughout the building created a palpable tension for everyone attending. Inside, the courtroom itself felt heavy with anticipation. Packed to capacity, the gallery included journalists from national and international outlets, sketch artists chronicling every moment, and townsfolk from Shadywood hoping to catch a glimpse of the man who had turned their lives upside down. At the front of the room, Ronald Garrick entered in shackles, escorted by 2 guards. His appearance was jarring, clean-shaven, his once disheveled hair had been trimmed, and he now wore a modest suit instead of his infamous black robes. But his demeanor had not changed. He walked with a calm confidence, his eyes scanning the room as though he were the one passing judgment on everyone else. Detective Townsend sat quietly in the front row, just behind the prosecutor's table. Though she had spent countless hours with this case, poring over evidence and reliving the horrors of the crimes in her mind, seeing Garrick in the courtroom felt different. He was no longer just a psychological profile, a name in a report, or a moving figure in the thermal images from the drones. He was real, flesh and blood, the embodiment of every sleepless night and unanswered prayer for closure. And now, it was time to see him held accountable. The prosecution's case. The lead prosecutor, Elizabeth Warren, was known for her sharp intellect and commanding presence in the courtroom. From the moment she began her opening statement, it was clear she had no intention of allowing Ronald Garrick to manipulate the proceedings with his quiet rhetoric or cryptic justifications. "Make no mistake," Warren began, her voice echoing through the tense chamber. "This trial is not about religion or forgiveness or repentance. It is about cold-blooded murder. 4 women, Samantha Pierce, Vanessa Harper, Heather Graham, and Megan Caldwell, were stripped of their lives, their futures, and their dreams by the man sitting before you today. They are not statistics. They were daughters, wives, sisters, and friends. Today, their voices must be heard." Warren meticulously laid out the case against Garrick. DNA evidence collected from the hunting cabin and linked to the victims was presented as irrefutable proof of his guilt. Photographs of the victims' belongings found in Garrick's possession, the journal, bracelet, scarf, were shown to the jury, eliciting audible gasps from the gallery. Warren then turned to the Polaroids taken by Garrick, which captured haunting images of his victims in their most vulnerable moments. "These photographs," Warren said, holding one in her hands but turning it away from the gallery, "are not the work of a savior. They are the trophies of a predator." The survivor, Chloe Jackson, was also a key witness for the prosecution. Taking the stand, she spoke with remarkable bravery about the day she escaped Garrick's clutches. Her voice trembled as she described his cold demeanor, his calculated movements, and the chilling way he spoke as though he were delivering a sermon. "He told me I was lost," Chloe said, her eyes fixed on the floor, "and that he could save me. But I wasn't lost. He was the one who was lost." Her testimony was punctuated by the presentation of physical evidence matching her story: the torn strap from her backpack, the scratches and injuries she sustained during her escape, and remnants of the trail soil found both on her clothing and inside Garrick's cabin. Warren also brought in experts, including FBI behavioral analysts, to highlight Garrick's psychological profile. They described him as deeply narcissistic, a man who saw himself as a divine arbiter with absolute authority over life and death. His actions, they argued, were not the product of religious conviction but a perversion of it, crafted to satisfy his own twisted desires for power and control. The defense's strategy. The defense faced an uphill battle from the start, with the evidence against Garrick being overwhelming. His court-appointed attorney, Peter Langford, leaned heavily on the argument of mental instability, claiming that Garrick was unfit to stand trial due to his delusional state of mind. "Mr. Garrick is not a criminal in the traditional sense," Langford told the jury. "He is a profoundly disturbed individual operating under a psychotic break from reality. This is not a man who deserves punishment, but a man who deserves treatment." To bolster this claim, the defense presented records of Garrick's troubled past, painting a picture of a man who had been abandoned by his family, rejected by society, and left to grapple with untreated mental illness for decades. They argued that his delusions of being a messenger were a symptom of his detachment from reality, not evidence of malice or calculated intent. But it quickly became clear that the jury wasn't buying it. Garrick's own behavior in court did him no favors. On several occasions he interrupted proceedings to deliver cryptic, sermon-like statements proclaiming, "I am the hand of judgment," and "My work is not yet finished." Each outburst only served to solidify the prosecution's portrayal of him as a cold, manipulative killer who fully understood his actions. The families take the stand. The trial's most emotional moments came when the families of the victims took the stand. They spoke not only of their grief, but also of the light and love their daughters had brought into the world before it was snuffed out. "She wasn't just my daughter," Vanessa Harper's mother said tearfully, holding up a photo of Vanessa. "She was my best friend. She loved animals, she loved her students, and she loved life. And that man over there, he stole her from us." The jury watched silently, some visibly moved, as each family shared their pain. It was a reminder that this trial wasn't just about convicting Garrick, it was about honoring the lives of those he had taken. The verdict. After weeks of testimony, evidence, and harrowing recollections, the case was handed over to the jury. For 3 days they deliberated behind closed doors, while a tense silence settled over Shadywood and the courtroom. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, town residents gathered at community centers to await updates, and the families of the victims clung to one another, desperate for justice. On October 20th, 2019, the jury returned with their verdict. The foreman stood, clearing his throat before reading the words that would ripple through the nation. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Ronald Garrick, guilty on all counts." The The gallery erupted in muffled cries and gasps of relief. Townsend exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Justice, at least in a courtroom sense, had been served. The sentencing phase was swift. Due to the premeditated nature of the crimes, the brutality involved, and the evidence of psychological torment inflicted on the victims, the judge sentenced Garrick to death by lethal injection. It was a sentence that divided public opinion but brought a bittersweet sense of closure to the families. A trial that left scars. The trial of Ronald Garrick became a landmark case, not just for Shadywood but for the entire nation. It sparked discussions about mental health, the failures of society to intervene in cases of obvious instability, and the way predators like Garrick can hide in plain sight under the guise of faith and authority. For the people of Shadywood, the trial marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a slow, painful recovery from the darkness that had consumed their community. Detective Townsend, reflecting on the trial months later, felt both relief and an unsettling emptiness. Justice had been served, but justice could not bring back the women whose lives had been taken. "It's never enough," she muttered one evening, staring at the fading case files on her desk, "but it's all we can do." Closing a chapter of nightmares. The Shadywood forest was quiet again, eerily so. After months of terror, a suffocating sense of dread that had consumed the community was finally beginning to lift. Ronald Garrick, the so-called priest of Shadywood, was sitting behind bars awaiting his fate. The man who had hunted women under the guise of piety had been brought to justice, and for many, that should have been a relief. Yet the trauma he inflicted lingered like the tangled shadows of the forest. For the families of the victims, the people of Shadywood, and Detective Sarah Townsend, the ordeal wasn't something that could simply be erased overnight. It had shifted something inside each of them, leaving scars both visible and hidden. A town haunted, but healing. In the days following Ronald Garrick's trial and sentencing, Shadywood seemed frozen in time. The community, once vibrant and peaceful, moved through its routines as if under a cloud of collective mourning. Shop owners were hesitant to open early or stay late. Parents walked their children to school rather than letting them bike or catch the bus alone. Woods that once called out to hikers and campers now stood empty, avoided by even the most seasoned outdoorsmen. The locals referred to it as a shadow that the town couldn't quite shake. At the trailhead leading to Shadywood Forest, a small memorial was erected by the families of the victims. Flowers, candles, and photographs formed a heartbreaking collage of the lives stolen too soon. Samantha Pierce's college photo smiled radiantly beneath a bouquet of wildflowers. Vanessa Harper's picture, tucked into the corner of the display, showed her wedding day. Her husband stood beside her, his grief now a pale reflection of the happiness frozen in the image. Heather Graham's Polaroid camera sat on the memorial's edge, a chilling reminder of how art and beauty should have defined her life, not fear. And Megan Caldwell's teaching badge was strung carefully from a small wooden cross, the badge number engraved to symbolize her love for her students. As days turned into weeks, more residents began to visit the memorial. Some lit candles, some said prayers, others simply stood silently, remembering the time when the forest was a place of solace, not horror. The loss was impossible to ignore, but in their quiet resilience, the townspeople began to reclaim something they thought had been lost forever: solidarity. "There's no replacing what he stole from us," Emma Graham, Heather's sister, said during a vigil one evening, "but we can make sure this place, this town, remembers who we are. Shadywood isn't his. It's ours." Detective Townsend's reflection. Detective Sarah Townsend entered the case on a routine missing persons report, but by the time it was over, her entire life had been reshaped. She had stared into the abyss of evil, chased it through the depths of an unforgiving wilderness, and pulled survivors and answers from its grasp. Yet the sense of accomplishment felt hollow. She hadn't forgotten the faces of the victims or the long, sleepless nights studying Garrick's twisted psychology. And she knew she never would. In the weeks following the trial, Townsend resumed her duties, albeit with a heavier heart. Her once steady confidence in law enforcement and its ability to protect civilians now came with the understanding of its limitations. "Justice doesn't make up for the lives we couldn't save," she muttered one night to her deputy while reviewing cold cases. "It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. It covers it up, but that wound, it's still there." Her role in the investigation had turned her into a reluctant public figure, with journalists and true crime enthusiasts constantly trying to interview her, but Townsend hated the attention. She wasn't a hero, and she didn't want to be treated like one. Any small victory she achieved was soured by the weight of knowing that it wasn't enough to undo what had been done. Still, one small measure of solace came in the form of a handwritten letter she received from Chloe Jackson, the sole survivor of Garrick's attacks. The note was short, but heartfelt. "Thank you for believing in me. I wouldn't have made it without you." Townsend read the letter several times, folding it carefully before slipping it into her desk drawer. She hadn't saved Chloe by herself, she knew that, but those words served as a reminder of why she kept going, even amid the darkness. Garrick's fate. Ronald Garrick sat alone in a maximum security prison, his trial behind him and his sentencing final, death by lethal injection. To him the verdict seemed irrelevant. He never showed remorse, never begged for leniency. To anyone who would listen, he continued to spew the cryptic slogans of his imagined divinity. "I am not defeated," Garrick reportedly told a journalist who managed to secure a brief interview. "I've done his work and it is not finished. The seeds I've planted, they will grow." His words sent chills down the spines of anyone who heard them, but they were also dismissed by most. Prisons were full of men who still believed they were invincible, even as the steel bars said otherwise. Nevertheless, Garrick's story grew legs in the world of pop culture and conspiracy theorists. Books were written about the priest of Shadywood, podcasts dissected every detail of his life, and social media erupted with armchair detectives debating where his ideology came from. Townsend actively avoided every mention of him. The last thing she wanted was for him to be immortalized. "Let him fade into obscurity," she said to a fellow detective. "He's a nobody without shadows to hide in. Legacy and change." If nothing else, Ronald Garrick's heinous crimes left an indelible impact on Shadywood and beyond. The investigation fueled statewide reforms over how missing persons cases were handled, especially regarding young adults. Forest trail systems in Oregon underwent scrutiny, with stricter surveillance and enhanced law enforcement patrols becoming standard across high-traffic areas. Survivor Chloe Jackson also used her experience to become a voice for change. Though she found it difficult at first, she eventually decided to speak publicly about her ordeal, advocating better safety awareness for solo hikers and young women. "I don't want anyone to go through what I did," she said during an interview on national television. "And if my story can stop even one person from trusting a stranger too easily, or walking into a situation like the one I escaped, then maybe some good can come from all of this." Her bravery gave the town something to hold on to amid their grief. Chloe, once an ordinary barista, became a symbol of survival for Shadywood, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, there could still be light. The forest in silence. With Ronald Garrick locked away and the wounds of the trial fresh, Shadywood Forest itself became something of a paradox. It was still beautiful, with its winding trails and towering evergreens that created a canopy of green, but the oppressive weight of its history kept most hikers away. The forest seemed to breathe easier, its silence no longer interrupted by the mourning cries of lost loved ones, but for those who knew what transpired under its roof of leaves, it would never be the same. Detective Townsend visited the memorial one last time before leaving the case behind completely. She ran her fingers across the edge of Samantha Pierce's photo and whispered, "I'm sorry we couldn't save you." Looking into the depths of the forest from the trailhead, she allowed herself the smallest exhale of relief. "But it's over now," she muttered, though some part of her wondered if she fully believed it. The Shadywood Forest, like the people of the town, would heal. Slowly, painfully, but surely, because that was the only choice they had. The end of a nightmare, but not the end of the story. Ultimately, the capture and conviction of Ronald Garrick marked the end of a reign of terror, but it was far from the closing of all emotional chapters. The lessons of Shadywood, about resilience, loss, and healing, would live on far longer than the memory of the man who had brought so much darkness. And for Detective Sarah Townsend, Chloe Jackson, and the families of the victims, one truth remained. While the nightmare had ended, the journey toward peace was only just beginning.